Good morning and welcome, everyone. Good to see so many familiar faces out there. Happy, just happy to allow Lindsay to come and give her presentation. I'm going to let her do her own bio and introduction because she knows it better than I do. But a couple of just minor housekeeping things. Just a reminder, we are recording this and this will be placed on YouTube. So mind your P's and Q's, everyone. I would appreciate that. And yeah, I'm just going to turn it over to Lindsay from here on out. So it's good seeing you all. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Thanks, Ryan. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Thank you so much for taking your time today to show up and talk about DV. I know it's not always the most exciting topic, or maybe it is, but thank you for taking your time today to dedicate to this space. A little bit about myself, quick intro to me. My name is Lindsey Barkley, and I am the Domestic Violence Program Manager with DCYF. If you have not heard of my position, no worries, it is new. We intentionally restructured a little bit to make sure that we had one person primarily responsible for DV. My personal career experience, I've spent the last 16, 17 years now, I'm dating myself a little bit, serving survivors and their children, primarily within clinical settings and within domestic violence advocacy organizations. Through part of those roles, I did consult with the department, primarily on critical incident reviews for the last 8 years. And then I got very excited for this opportunity to bring more DV awareness in for folks. So that is a little bit about me and my experience. Today, we're going to be talking about the way DCYF is assessing for domestic violence and what we are breaking down as far as what we're looking at within families. General housekeeping, I would love for you all to engage with me. If there are questions that arise, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. Feel free to put it in the chat. I'm going to be trying to monitor the chat at the same time as well. So please feel free to utilize those if that is helpful for you. I also want to take just a moment. DCYF now has regional domestic violence leads that are helping support facilitation of conversation and getting materials out within various regions. And so I would love to take a moment for my leads to introduce themselves if they are willing to. Stephanie, may I call on you?
Okay, and I've muted my microphone. Is she going to go around and calling everybody?
No, I'm not, I promise. I was just calling on my leads. Stephanie, can you introduce yourself, please? I don't know if she can hear me. How about Teresa? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Hey there, my name is Teresa Freelove. I am a front end, so CPS and FAR social worker in our Spokane Central office, and I am the lead for the domestic violence for the entire Region 1. So that covers most of Eastern or Northeastern Washington.
Thank you very much. And then we have lovely Miss Stephanie Frazier present with us, and she is our lead for Region 6, which covers the West Coast Peninsula primarily. Thanks, Stephanie. All right. I think my other ones unfortunately got called to other things. So hopefully we get a chance to introduce them later. Okay, getting started. Assessing domestic violence and child welfare. So first and foremost, primarily, incredibly important, to discuss how we're defining DV. So domestic violence has a few different definitions, right? We have the criminal definition, which is usually incident-based, usually one time, that we're looking at where there might be criminal proceedings happening, right? But there was an intervention likely that came to our awareness. And then there's domestic violence, as in the pattern between intimate partners. And the law did just get updated, so I'm going to read it a little bit to you, and I apologize. But the new definition of domestic violence is the infliction or threat of physical harm against an intimate partner, and it includes physical, sexual, and psychological abuse against that partner, and is a part of a pattern of assaultive, coercive, and controlling behaviors directed at achieving compliance from or control over that intimate partner. The biggest thing I want to highlight here is that it is about a pattern, right? We don't want to assess just one incident. We want the whole holistic picture. And so we want to know the history, how it intersects, et cetera. So we really want to look at defining and identifying the pattern that is occurring. And I just want to take a moment and also co-sign in the chat, sending love and well wishes to all of our individuals within fire regions right now. Thank you for putting that into the chat. Vocabulary and definitions. Words are important, right? I might switch up my words a little bit as I'm talking, but adult victim, victim survivor, the survivor is how we reference the party that is being perpetrated against. Survivor terminology comes from a strengths-based empowerment model, and so you're more likely to hear me lean into that from my experience of survivor. Perpetrator, abuser, batterer, parent alleged to be causing harm, right? I'm still talking about the individual that is maintaining the power control cycle within the family and inflicting harm on other individuals. DV versus IPV. We know that we are in the land of acronyms. So if I slip up and use these ones, DV is domestic violence, IPV is intimate partner violence, right? And that's specifically the pattern that we're assessing and looking at. And then I might talk about DBIT, which is domestic violence intervention treatment. And that is the main evidence-based modality utilized within Washington State that we provide a lot of services for to assist perpetrators in healing, to maybe aid in decreasing their perpetration. Why are we here? Why is it important, right? We know that children witness the violence nearly 1 in 4 times that cases were filed within state courts. I do want to highlight 1 in 4 is only for this ones that are actually filed, right? So we know that the data discrepancy, many cases are never filed within civil litigation or criminal courts. So these are not captured within the study. But we know for sure 1 in 4 children are being exposed to violence. We know that 30 to 60% of intimate partner violence perpetrators also perpetrate against the children in the home, right? Very, very high correlation and intersection. According to the U.S. Advisory Board on Child Abuse and Neglect, domestic violence may be the single major precursor to child fatalities within the United States. And between 48 and 89% of domestic violence victims with pets report that their animals have been threatened, injured, or killed by their abusive partner. Why might you all think that I'm asking or bringing in information about the animals? And I please put into the chat, feel free to come off mute. Why do I think it's important to share with you about the animal? The kids are attached to the animal. Pattern, yes. Abusing the animal is abusing the one who loves the animal. Yes. Coercive tactics, emotional manipulation, continued abuse of people. Animals may be considered family. Survivors stay for the pets. Yes, 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 yes. Some perpetrators start with the animals. Okay. Absolutely. You guys were spot on, and thank you all for participating and popping that into the chat. Spot on, right? A very high intersection of people that perpetrate against an animal, which can be considered the non-verbal family member. If they perpetrate against an animal, they're likely perpetrating against adults in the home. Also as a coercion tactic, right? And intimidation of if I take the consequences out on the animal, I can easily more control the humans within the home, and the animal can't speak up to say they're being harmed, right? So absolutely, very high intersection. So particularly, we are discussing DCYF policy 1170, which is specific to domestic violence. And these policies and procedures are currently being updated to provide more clarity. So if anybody would like more information about that, as that progress moves forward, please feel free to reach out. But primarily, our goal is to work on increasing the safety of the children. And one of the main ways that we do that and desire to do that is partnering with the survivor in order to increase that safety. Does anybody have ideas of why we might partner with the identified survivor first? Once they're safe, they can support the child so that they don't get further controlled or coerced. Tools, resources for context. They may be ready to talk. They know the situation and triggers in the household. Mhm. They know the type of abuse and the words to describe it. They know the perpetrator. Spot on. Thank you all so much. All of that, right? Yes, the survivor knows what threats have been alleged, right? They know the nitty-gritty secrets. They know all of it. They also know if a service provider is at risk for supporting and intervening. Right. So also very crucial for staff safety, as we're all interacting. We want to know if threats have been lodged against us, right? And absolutely, so they can protect themselves and gain the necessary tools and then continue protecting the children. Spot on, right? We also want to have a firm understanding of what protective capacities the survivor has implemented, because it might be really confusing to us from the outside, right? If both partners are engaging in physical assault, for instance, it might be hard to see who the identified main perpetrator is. So we absolutely want the context and additional information because it all plays into how we're looking at it. And through doing that, we want to respect the decision making of the adult survivor, right? We know that the pattern of domestic violence removes autonomy from somebody, and somebody's decision making efforts can be reduced with this kind of trauma and violence. And so we want to support them increasing their autonomy and getting access to what their family needs. We want to work on supporting families in culturally competent ways. We know that domestic violence is a culture all of its own. However, domestic violence is also interwoven into every culture that there is out there, right? It is very present. And knowing that, we also know that domestic violence can present slightly differently in different cultures, right? The patterns of tactics, the words being utilized, different types of physical assaults, right, are within a particular culture. Or, for instance, let's say, further manipulation of systems because of historical traumas. Or let's say the survivor has status issues, or they identify as LGBTQIA, right? They need medicine, things like that. So the abuse might look differently. It might look like medication tampering. It might look like messing with community or bad mouthing them within the community primarily, right? So we want to know what is their cultural identification and work on providing services according to that culture, which also means cultural specific hotlines, which our workers all have access to and are also utilizing that for the communities that we're serving. We want to work on holding DV perpetrators accountable for their abuse and their parenting decisions to perpetrate abuse onto their partner, right? Because ultimately, the survivor has control over their behavior, right? But they do not have control over the perpetrator's behavior. And the perpetrator has a right, for their children and to be a healthy parent. And we want to hold them accountable to being that healthy parent and getting access to the services that they need. And through that, we want to work very collaboratively with our community partners, right? Coordinated care is incredibly important in domestic violence cases, especially with history of system manipulations, right? If we're all collaborating and working together, there's less chance of the systems being manipulated to further cause harm to the family. Screening for DV. So we all screen for DV at DCYF. DV screening occurs at very key critical moments, but it also occurs from the moment we touch base with the family. So the moment that a call is made to our intake line, we are screening for DV from that moment moving forward. We ask the participant that's calling if they're aware of intimate partner violence occurring or DV. And then we continue our assessment through record search, whether that be our own internal records, or maybe we're pulling from law enforcement reports or court reports to further assess if domestic violence is happening for the family. As we move into investigation phases in our other programs, we're still continually assessing for domestic violence. Domestic violence assessment occurs throughout the entire life of a case. Not as necessarily a structured tool, but more of an awareness of the pattern within the family and leaning into what that pattern looks like, constantly assessing. And then other key times that we want to make sure that we're doing our universal screening protocols is at the first contact with the family, if at all possible, right? There's times that when we first get to know somebody or introduce ourselves, we don't always get the opportunity to ask people separately at that point in time. And we'll discuss why it's important to ask people separately here in just a few minutes. But we want to be mindful of that and get it as soon as possible. We're going to start DV screening. And then if we're working with a family and we get a new screen in to our intake line, we would do another reassessment of safety at that time. We would do, or when we're doing a case transfer, we would reassess if domestic violence is happening or a reassessment of safety. So if there's more incidences, if we're looking at new things that are occurring or have new concerns, we're going to continually reassess if domestic violence risks have increased. Starting the conversation, we encourage open-ended questions and really making it neutral. And, can you tell me how you resolve conflict within your family? What does it look like? What does it look like if your partner wants something to occur and they don't get their way? How does that result in an argument, or how do you all resolve that, right? And we make it very general, and we just want to be open, and we make it a part of our routine process. We ask all families these questions. Our interviewing strategies are pretty specific. So first and foremost, we would like to interview all family members separately, right? It's critical to be able to try and give opportunity for disclosures. So we interview every family member separately, ideally, if at all possible. And we interview all parties within a relationship, right? We want to know everybody's perspective on their dynamic and how they've connected, and their history. We want to know all of those things. Again, we're presenting the questions as being routine. We ask all of our families these things, and we really want to lean into what their family culture is. When we ask the questions, we do try to get behaviorally specific recounts of the incidences. So, for instance, we might ask them to describe it as if it were a movie scene, and can they describe to us what was occurring within their life during that time? Very, very behaviorally specific. What did they do? What did the identified perpetrator do? What did the kids do? We want to make sure that we're capturing the movie scene for all individuals, and being very behaviorally specific so we can help intervene in the specific behavior itself. We like to remain calm, matter of fact, right? Stay neutral. We know that survivors, as well as perpetrators, look for nonverbals, right? They look for ways of survival and navigating systems. And so they're very in tune with those nonverbals. So we really want to remain open and neutral, and supportive to the individual that we're interviewing. And once the adult domestic violence survivor and the identified perpetrator have been identified within the family, we want to be very intentional about the interviews that we're doing moving forward. So our workers are identifying what information are they missing? Is there additional context that they would like to know? Maybe some other additional questions, maybe new allegations came up that we need to ask questions about. So we are very intentional about then planning our interviews in advance, to reduce the chance of systemic manipulation, or distracting us from the conversation of what we really need to know that day. Identifying the survivor versus the perpetrator might be the easiest thing for all of us, right? Just kidding. So what we're looking at when we're identifying who's the survivor and who's the perpetrator, please enjoy my beautiful clip art. But ultimately, we want to know who is making the other person's world smaller, right? That'll tell us who is maintaining the control within the family. So we want to know who is afraid of whom. What does that look like? If there's physical force occurring, whose physical force creates fear? Connected to that, we might also use a different word than fear if we're interviewing, right? Because some cultures will never identify the word fear or afraid as an emotion that they may experience. So we try to avoid those, again, behaviorally specific. But whose use of physical force is creating fear within the family? And what is the intent of each person's physical force, right? We know survivors fight back. We know that survivors can engage in reactive abuse, or they can initiate an incident, right? But we want to be mindful, what was the intent of that? Was it as a protective capacity? Was it as a form of perpetration, right? Looking and digging into the why and the context behind the incident or altercation. We want to know who suffers the most consequences from being in this relationship. Who has lost relationships or a job or access to something, right? Who has the most consequences and can't have a life outside of the family unit? Who's that impacting? We want to be mindful of who is exerting control through coercive tactics. That being said, this is another one where both parties might engage in the behavior, right? Perpetrators as well as survivors might engage in coercion. Why might a survivor engage in coercive control? Feel free to hop off mute or put it in the chat. A learned survival tactic. Mhm. Mhm. Defense mechanism, self-protection. What they know and understand as a way to attempt to reclaim control. Yes, yes. To protect the kids. Yes, absolutely, right? As a protective capacity, right? So again, we're looking at the why and context behind the behavior. It may look the same on the outside. They're both engaging in coercive control, right? It meets our definition of coercive control, but we want to dig into the why, right? Again, it could be a protective capacity, and that's something we always want to take into consideration. Was it a protective capacity? So spot on. We also want to know, is one partner more vulnerable in general? Does one partner have any form of disabilities? Does one partner not have income? Again, status issues, right? Is there something about one partner that makes them more vulnerable to be manipulated or controlled? And what does that look like within the family? If they have mental health concerns, is their mental health impacts or sensations being coerced or manipulated in some way, right? We want to be mindful if they're vulnerable to manipulation because of mental health or other issues. Are people familiar with the power and control wheel? Have we all seen this tool? Love it. Thank you all for nodding your heads. Um, Absolutely. Power control wheel, very prevalent. The power control is a beautiful tool. It is translated into 45 different languages, and our staff have direct access to that. I absolutely will put it in a chat. And you know what, Joanna? I will also make sure that I follow up with Ryan with any additional things that we need today. And I will get you the links specifically because I want you to have access to all the wheels. Because not only is there the power control wheel, but there's also culturally specific wheels, right? These are just one pagers. There are wheels that discuss post-separation abuse and what that can look like. Wheels for what abuse of children or nurturing of children within these contexts can look like. There are DV wheels for all of it, and they are beautiful and behaviorally specific. So we love behaviorally specific. So a really great tool. Our caseworkers utilize this for self-education or for education in the families that they're serving, right? Primarily the survivor. We wouldn't present this to a perpetrator, but we might use this as an engagement tool. However, and I don't like introducing the power control wheel, I'm biased, without the equality wheel. We spent a lot of time asking about the abuse tactics or conflict or, the things that are maltreatment within the family, but we also want to discuss equality and green flags, right? And why they stay, right? There's reasons why they stay, and there's facets on both wheels of what's within their relationship. Also, if they're still, experiencing some ambivalence or they aren't sure about this relationship and where, if they want to stay or they want to go, the equality wheel can be a start to engaging and validating before going into the abuse cycles and that gentle confrontation of what occurs when we start education. Okay. Specialized DV assessment. So, specialized DV assessments, we are only completing them in families that we've already identified domestic violence is occurring. Okay, so in our programming from intake up until engaging with the family, if we found it in records, if we found it in collateral reports, the family disclosed to us directly, then we're going to go ahead and engage in a domestic violence assessment, a specialized domestic violence assessment. Excuse me. There is a best practice for conducting the order of the interviews, if at all possible. So, the order of those interviews usually occurs with interviewing the adult survivor first, unless it's going to create a risk to the children, right? Because again, there are times that the allegations may be against the adult survivor. So we do want to be mindful of that. And if it's going to create a risk to the children, for us to interview them first, right? And then we would interview the child or children, then the identified domestic violence perpetrator, and then any additional collaterals, because we really want to get as much information as we can, right? We want that holistic view of the family. We want to know what's happening in these dynamics and how it's impacting them, both behind closed doors and out in public, right? We really need to know all of those things. Just taking a moment to scroll and make sure it's just your emails and no questions. Perfect. Are you all fairly familiar with all of these court orders? I won't go into them too much if you are. Brief overview. Why it's important. These orders are so important to our assessment, and we try to make sure that we can get as much of this information as possible. So, a DVPO is domestic violence protection order, right? It is a civil order that the identified survivor can go and petition for independently to try and get protections and outlines for potentially themselves or their children. In most jurisdictions, a domestic violence protection order is initially issued for 2 weeks, right? At that point, beautiful. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you putting that in the chat. I'd love to go over it then. I'm going to go over it anyway. Okay. Oh, at the 2 weeks, sorry, I lost myself, got excited. At the 2-week mark, a lot of children are dropped off of the domestic violence protection order. Does anybody have any ideas of why a child might be dropped off of a protection order at a 2-week mark? Any thoughts on that? Thanks, Katie. I see you. Because they want it to go to his, oh, removed from the home. Oh, that was a good one. Parental rights. Yes, right? Sometimes the perp will want to keep the child from the parent. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So spot on. And parental rights, family law, right? Over here, if we got our protection order commissioner or judge, right, they want you to go talk to the family law one. So you got to go to the next courtroom or wherever the courtroom is, right? They think that's a different civil law matter. And then you have to go through a parenting plan process or protection underneath the parenting plan. So we know that about DVPOs. DVPOs, excuse me, also occur, usually the first issue is for 1 year. Sometimes you might see a 2-year, sometimes you might see a 5, sometimes you might see until the year 2099. And why that's so important is because the level of time associated underneath that protection really speaks to the legal admissible evidence that was presented of this person's perpetration patterns, right? This person is so violent, and we have all of this legally admissible evidence that this order was granted. And if it's until 2099, we know that human is incredibly dangerous, and we want to be sure that we're including that in our assessment and how it's impacting the children. A no contact order. A no contact order is another restrictive order. It is normally issued primarily when there's a criminal charge, right? So an incident occurred, again, that one time where something criminal happened, an assault, right? Somebody had a mark on their body. A no contact order may be issued then, okay? The thing to know about no contact orders and why we need to evaluate them for safety within the family is that no contact orders, if the case gets pled down or dismissed, the no contact order also goes away. So even if the no contact order said until 2099, it may not be that long, especially in domestic violence cases. There's a lot of pleading down, right? And getting lesser charges. So knowing the no contact order goes away. A lot of domestic violence advocacy organizations will advocate for survivors to get both orders concurrently, to have the no contact order and to have a DVPO, just so they have some layer of protection, if that is a layer of protection for them, because legal matters are not always protection for some survivors. We want to be mindful of that too. No contact orders. So absolutely, we want to be aware of those. Are these orders enforced by the police? Great question, Tom. Sometimes. That it depends on the jurisdiction and it depends on what needs to be enforced. So let's say the violation is phone calls. Maybe those are documented. A survivor can report that or provide it to law enforcement. Or if there's criminal, they do have an assigned advocate through the courthouse usually, who they can provide those to and possibly go those avenues. So there is opportunity for that. If a perpetrator just comes on premises and violates, like, let's say the order says they have to stay 500 feet away from the identified survivor, but they come within 100 feet of the survivor, right? Law enforcement, depending on the jurisdiction, may not respond. Some jurisdictions are very much, unless an assault is occurring right now, we are unable to send manpower out for it. Call the non-emergent line to do, your report of violation. Now, depending on the violations and what kind of violations, depends on the consequences for said violation. But more often than not, the consequences are low for repeated violations. We also know repeated violations is a lethality indicator for the family members, right? We want to be aware of that. So we're going to assess it. We are going to be aware, are the police responding? We're going to include that in our data. We're also going to review in our assessment, if there was a violation, is the survivor able to report? Is there barriers to reporting, whether that's external from their partner or internal barrier for calling law enforcement, right? We also want to be aware of, can they report within the violence they're experiencing? Restraining orders are another order that is important to review for our domestic violence assessment. Those are normally, again, it's a civil order. It's normally filed underneath a divorce decree. And it usually outlines like communication, who's going on the property at what times, things like that. So it's still restrictive to a capacity, but that can vary. And if domestic violence is present, they might just do a domestic violence protection order underneath the divorce decree. Another order that I do not have highlighted directly on this page is a parenting plan, right? Parenting plans can also be restrictive orders, and we absolutely want to know what that looks like. And if one party already had restrictions within a parenting plan, we want to know the why. What was the behavior behind the why, and how can we support them in getting access to resources to reduce that behavior? So we're also evaluating our parenting plans. Any questions about court orders or how DCYF is assessing this within our assessment? For DV protection orders, what happens if the perpetrator disagrees? I want to ask a clarifying question, Tom. Do you mean if the perpetrator disagrees with the order entirely? Like when they get filed and they get served and they disagree with the order?
Hello? Can you
Yeah,
hear me? Yeah,
can.
so I guess I'm just looking at the column that says DV protection order and it says victim petitions the court to ask for protection and perpetrator can agree or disagree. It just seems like there's nobody can enforce anything because he's just or he or she is just gonna say, oh, I don't care about this order, you know?
Well, and that's what we want to assess too, right? We want to know, whoever the identified perpetrator, do they care about court orders? Does it curb their behavior? Does it interrupt their behavior, right? We know if they don't care, that's a lethality indicator, right? It says a lot about their mental capacity and their mental state and their degree of perpetration and their intent to not change their behavior. Regarding the disagree part. So anytime things are filed within the court, right, all parties to the case have to be served. You have the petitioner and the respondent. The respondent has a legal right to defend themselves or to say these allegations are untrue. You need to provide legally admissible evidence to make sure that this can go through. So they are entitled to contest it and have their defense and put in their own declarations of what they, from their perspective, what has occurred to try to not get an order placed. So they can go and argue it a little bit. Oftentimes perpetrators have a lawyer, their lawyer may go argue it. So that's what the disagree is. They have to be served. Now let's say perpetrator doesn't agree, and so they just don't show up to court. Then it defaults to the survivor and what they wanted, more often than not. Okay, I see another question. What is the purpose of assessing them? We want to assess what has occurred within the family. So all of these orders, you have to write a declaration, right? And they have to be behaviorally specific declarations of what has occurred and why people are afraid, why they fear for their lives. And we know that once survivors have disclosed, or people that are being perpetrated against have disclosed, we know lethality can increase, but it's also all out there, right? And so we want to know what they've said before. We also want to know what were the consequences of them speaking up. They put all of that on record, right? And so we want to know, were there consequences within the family, and what did that look like? We also want to know, what were the potential threats towards the children in these instances? What were the patterns of perpetration within these instances, right? And how did it impact the kids? And those petitions and declarations for the courts might tell us a whole lot of things about that pattern. And that's what we want to know about, so we can start to intervene and interrupt it. And Sue, please let me know. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. I'll give it
So,
go ahead, Tom.
question. So you're saying, because this is like gathering information, right? So you're saying that when we have this information, somehow our behavior is going to change, like we're going to up the stakes or something like that, or?
Kinda. Here's what we're gonna do, Tom. We're gonna plan in advance how we do our meetings moving forward. We are going to be intentional about doing separate family, youth and family meetings. Sorry, I got a new title. We're going to be very intentional at the ways we're intervening and now supporting the family, because we want to give opportunity for the survivor parent to get everything that they need to keep them and the kids safe. Right. And so, yeah, we're assessing all of these things so we can provide the resources to interrupt it. And systemic accountability is the best way to curb somebody's behavior when it comes to perpetration. Go ahead, Tom.
So would that be kind of like all of a sudden you would try to find a domestic violence shelter, one of those anonymous shelters?
Absolutely, we might, right? We absolutely, if we know that there's been a risk for the identified survivor and the children, let's say we had an interview with the perpetrator and we held them accountable and their behavior escalated. And they got very angry because we were told things that they didn't want us to know, for instance. We know if that can potentially, right, increase the risk for the survivor and the children. And hopefully we've partnered enough with the survivor that when we call the identified survivor after our interview, we're going to check in. Okay, here's what happened. Are you going to be safe tonight? What do you need? Right. And it might be times that we are calling around to domestic violence hotlines with them. Maybe depending on the region, we might have a close relationship with local domestic violence organizations. And so we might do like a warm handoff, an intro to that domestic violence organization. There's also times that we might get a hotel room for a survivor in really extreme instances and when we don't have access to other resources.
Hey, Lindsay.
Right.
Yeah, no, thanks. I just want to remind everyone too, and Lindsay, I think maybe this will help as you clarify who's we, because remember, we're talking to a bunch of child advocates here.
I apologize. We as DCYF.
Thank you. So, Tom, so they're going to be working behind the scenes a lot to kind of do all that. And so our role in this would be to maybe make sure that the social worker knows anything that you know about the DV pattern so that they can include that in the stuff that they're working on too. We will sometimes get involved in the court orders around DV and restraining orders and things like that. But most of that is going to come through our talking with the social worker and the attorney general so that they can proceed forward with that aspect of the case.
Thanks, Ryan. Absolutely. I want to lean into what Ryan said as information that you might have is important for the caseworker, right? We want to work collaboratively with you as close as possible because you might have a different approach and you might get more disclosures, right? And all of that is so crucial for child safety. And so we really want to work together in making sure, right, we all have the same information. Also, the importance of that, again, is manipulation, right? Systemic manipulation is very prevalent in domestic violence, and we don't want to be a facet. And we as service providers in general, don't want to be a part of being manipulated, right? In this pattern of perpetration. We want to be safe people for people to get resources from. So that's where we want to absolutely look at some of those things. Okay. There's more questions about this, feel free to let me know. If not, we'll move on. Okay. When we do a DV specialized assessment, it is not a tool. It's not a checkbox. It's not a pre-filled sheet. It is just interview protocol where we are assessing 5 specific categories of information, right, for child safety purposes. The first one being, we want to look at the DV perpetrator's pattern of assaultive and coercive tactics, right? Again, we're reviewing those court orders, we're reviewing declarations, we're getting collateral reports, we're talking to you, hopefully regularly, right? And we're all looking at what is the pattern of assaultive and coercive tactics. Then we want to look at the impact of the DV on the identified adult survivor, right? What does that look like? Then we want to look at the impact of the identified domestic violence on the children within the home. We also want to review what are the protective factors? What does the family think were protective factors? What can we see and what can we increase? But what are the protective factors of the child, the survivor, the perpetrator, and their community? Do they have additional protective factors around them? We want to know all of those things. And we want to know the lethality of the DV, right? We want to know those warning indicators of how bad it's getting. And we're going to break down these a little bit more of what DCYF is assessing for. So in the DV perpetrator's pattern of assaultive and coercive tactics, we want to look at the history of it. We want to know, has it shifted over the course of time, the behaviors? Did it shift in different relationships? What did that look like? We also want to know, is the perpetrator violent in community, right? Is it just intimate partner violence where they are violent, or are they violent elsewhere, right? We absolutely want to know that, all the ways they could be violent. So we want to know where that's happening. We want to know if coercive control is happening again, right? Like manipulation of systems. We want to know what the invisible strings are behind behaviors, right? What is the why? We want to know, does the perpetrator utilize the children for perpetration and maintaining control over the survivor, right? That can look like they're going to take them away, they're going to get a parenting plan, you're never going to see them again. It could look like encouraging the children to start engaging in assaults. I've seen that so many times through the course of my career, and engaging in assaults towards the identified survivor or even towards their siblings, right? As a tactic for continued control. Most oftentimes that occurs when like the identified perpetrator wants information about the other party in the home, or you're supposed to do these certain things and they're coached to behave a certain way within the other environment, and maybe they don't report back. Maybe they didn't turn on their location on their cell phone, like, right? It could be any number of things, but there's oftentimes that still control will be happening within context of that. And we want to know, are they manipulating the children for control patterns, directly or indirectly? We would like to know, how has it changed over time? Again, has it changed? Were there life events that occurred and then it happened? Was it present? Let's say maybe the DV perpetrator got into a severe accident and they had a head injury. And so maybe they have a traumatic brain injury, right? We want to know that, right? Because that also speaks to their impulse control and possibly their need for medical intervention. So we want to be aware if that was a part of the pattern too. And again, how does the abuse change if they separate? Does it get worse? Does it go away? Is everything rainbows and kittens? What does it look like if they separate? And what did it look like if they got back together? What did it look like when they got back together? What was the why? And after how long did the perpetration resume? Right? We want to know all of that for the pattern. So impacts on the survivor. Excuse me. We want to know, has their health been impacted? So have they, sustained a physical injury? Have they sustained or have other diagnoses? So for instance, it is very common for survivors of complex trauma to experience like fibromyalgia and chronic pain. And we want to know if that has occurred for the survivor. Or for instance, as humans, when we get anxious, our stomachs produce more acid, which can make us very nauseous. And so maybe our eating has been impacted and we aren't really enjoying eating. And so, right, what are the health needs and impacts occurring? We want to know if there's a mental health impact. And specifically, we want to know, did the domestic violence cause the mental health concerns? Did it make the mental health concerns worse? Or did it interfere with the survivor's ability to treat the mental health concerns or get support with them? Okay. So really digging into, again, did it create it, make it worse, or interfere with is really what we want to look at for a survivor's mental health. We also want to be mindful of mental health coercion. We know that people's mental health is often used against them, right, in multiple capacities in different scenarios. And so we want to know if that's being manipulated. Oftentimes, perpetrators will start with, well, my partner's bipolar. That's why this is occurring. Like, I'm not abusing this person, right? My partner's bipolar, they're crazy. Right. And so pointing responsibility and accountability elsewhere. So we want to know, has that been used to manipulate or discredit the other parent in any way? We want to be aware if that's happening for mental health. For substance use, we also want to be aware of that pattern. And in the days of HPSOs, when it's really easy to dose somebody, it's also important for us to ask at DCYF and biased service providers if people have been encouraged or forced to use. Right. I think forced substance use within domestic violence is very, very prevalent. Dosing somebody without their knowledge is very, very prevalent within domestic violence. And if we don't ask some of those questions, sometimes all we see is the substance use itself, or the body's dependence on the substance, right? So the addiction cycle, we might see that process, but we also want to know the context of how we got here, and how is it manipulated today? For instance, who controls the substances in the family home? Who decides when they get them, what time they get them, what amount they get? Do they control detox, right? People are very easy to control if they're sick, right? And get detoxing makes you very ill, right? So we want to know also the pattern of substance use. Do they engage in use as a form of connecting, right? We want to know all of those things. What does it look like? Is it for coping? Right? Because that's real too. Is the survivor utilizing for coping skills, and do they need different coping skills is something also to know. But we want to be mindful of the way that's impacting the family and the impact on the children. We want to know about survivors' relationships. Are they allowed to have friends? Are they allowed to have family? Are they allowed to have a relationship with service providers? Right? We want to know, do they have access to those things, and is it okay? Are they allowed to have friends of other genders? Also something important to know. And is that being controlled? Employment to access and additional resources. We want to know if that's been impacted at all for the survivor, right? If they have one family car, who gets access to it? Is the survivor allowed to drive? Is the survivor allowed to utilize it to get the children to medical appointments? Even if the perpetrator is utilizing it for work, right? Is the perpetrator willing to give the car over for medical appointments or needs to be met, right? What does that look like? Is it controlled? Oftentimes you'll also see that in more rural communities, right? Where only one partner has a car. Also a very big part of isolation and manipulation is maintaining control over that vehicle and access to other humans. We want to know if the survivor's autonomy hasn't been impacted. Are they allowed to wear what they want to wear? Are they allowed to do their hair the way they want to do their hair? So simple as that. Are they allowed to have their eggs in the morning the way they want their eggs? That one sounds really silly. But how many survivors have told me something along the lines of their perpetrator like scrambled eggs with cheese on top, and violence ensues and retaliation starts if they made fried eggs instead of scrambled eggs with cheese on top? Right? It could be as simple as that. Also, after so many years of making scrambled eggs with cheese on top, and that's the only thing that you can make regarding eggs, you may not remember how to make a poached egg anymore, right? You may not remember that you like poached eggs. It's also something to remember is that once a survivor has lost it for so long, it can be really hard to find that again, right? In relation to autonomy. So important to know. We want to know some of those things. We also want to know how their parenting has been impacted. Has their parenting been supported? Has it been negated and counteracted? What does parenting look like for them? Are they allowed to have the relationship that they want to have with their children? And is it supported by the other party? Does the other parent identify strengths of this parent, right? We want to know that, right? Again, everybody has strengths. Can they pull out the strengths for each parent, for each other, and highlight that for us and for you? Well, got a little excited with the space button. We want to know the impact on the child. We want to know if their health has been impacted. Again, tummy aches, especially for littles, tummy aches are very prevalent. Regression in potty training can be another one for small children. So we want to know, has their health been impacted and how? Did they get harmed in a physical assault? We want to know that. Was their health in jeopardy of being hurt in a physical assault? What does that look like? Again, mental health. We want to know how their mental health has been impacted. And did the DV cause it? Or did the DV interfere with them getting access to services and making it better? We want to know that, right? Are they isolating themselves? Are they withdrawing in school? Are they engaging with their peer group? What does that look like, right? And that all impacts symptomology. Education. Are the children able to go to school? How are they doing in school? Are they able to pay attention? Right? We know complex trauma for children can present as inattentiveness, right? They struggle focusing and paying attention to something. So we really want to know if that's occurring for them in school, right? And checking in with their teachers and getting those collateral reports to make sure and assessing for those impacts. We want to be mindful of their relationships. Are the kids allowed to have relationships? Are they allowed to have their friends? We know that oftentimes when survivors flee, the first place that they end up going to usually is a friend or family member, right? If they've done that, how did it result, right? Is there continued retaliation? For instance, let's say the survivor flees to Auntie's house with the kids, okay? After potentially returning, if the relationship resumes, are the children now allowed to have a relationship with that auntie? Are they allowed to go over there? Are they allowed to unsupervised contact? Is auntie allowed to come over and visit? Right? Oftentimes perpetrators will interrupt those relationships too, right? As a form of retaliation because somebody threatened the power control dynamic. So we want to be mindful specifically on relationships for kids and who was a support person in some of those instances and can they still be without interference of the identified perpetrator. Parenting. How has the kids been receiving parenting? Are they feeling bonded and connected to both of their parents? Are both of their parents able to nurture and comfort them? Do they have fun times together? Do they go to both parents for help or support? Again, we want to know all those things. How has parenting been impacted? Housing. Again, we want to know, how has their housing been impacted, right? Because fleeing to a shelter is still impacting the child's immediate environment and their home, right? And no, shelter is not lovely for anybody. So we want to be mindful of that. Also, we want to be mindful, let's say, because oftentimes perpetrators control finances, right? So let's say a perpetrator is the primary breadwinner, bringing in the primary income for the family, and they engage in a physical assault of their partner, and they get arrested, and they go to jail for 30 days. Upon release, right, they didn't get paid for 30 days, right? What are the finances looking like? And is housing now a risk, right? That loss of income, can they pay the rent now, right? Is the rent going to get paid? Is the light bill going to get paid? Are they going to retaliate and not pay it because law enforcement got involved, right? Are they going to refuse to pay child support or ensure that the children's basic needs are met as a form of retaliation? We want to be mindful of that, right? And again, we want to connect in our assessment. There was a behavior of an assault that occurred, right? Perpetrator made a parenting decision to assault their partner. Fast forward to the impact on the child of that was A, probably witnessing it, but then their housing potentially being in jeopardy, right? So still a parenting decision that's still absolutely connected to impact on the child. And we at DCYF want to be aware of that pattern and how that's impacting the children. And do they need more resources for independent living, for instance, right? What does that look like? And again, can the child have autonomy? Back to, can they wear what they want to wear, age appropriate, right? Can they wear what they want to wear? Can they become the human they want to become? Are they allowed to have their own sense of identity, right? We know teens, they start to challenge that as they start to form who they are as a human, right? Can they? Is it supported by both parents? Again, and are children being encouraged or coached to engage in perpetration, right? If a child is having externalizing behaviors, A, we want to dig into the why behind it, right? But we also want to be curious of if it's being coached. For instance, one case I had, throughout the course of the abuse and cycle, the perpetrator had really targeted her neck region as one of his main points of impact. And she continued to have like misalignment in her vertebrae and things. I think for the rest of her life, she'll have it. But he was coaching the children to start hitting mom in the neck on the way to visitation exchange. So that by the time mom arrived to visit with the kids were escalated. Mom is escalated, crying. It created an unsafe, lethal situation on transport there. Maybe survivor was late because survivor had to pull over to make sure people are going to be safe in the car, right? Now that could be held against the survivor for being late, right? Then survivor shows up all scattered because their child was just assaulting them in the car, and they know that that's their child's hurt coming out, right? So many things. There was a narration that the perpetrator controlled, right? And what part of the narration are the kids being pulled into and manipulated into, right? We want to know that. And we want to help support the kids and not having to feel like they need to do those things, right? And create more safe and healthy connections. Okay. Protective factors. The more protective factors that we can get in place for the family, the better. We know supportive relationships are effective, right? What does their village look like? Their kin, their chosen family, their family members, how are they showing up? Are they supportive? Do they have a connection to service providers that feels supportive, that they can disclose some of these things to? We want to know, right? What's happening there? We want to know, can all the parties recognize the impact of the DV on the child or children? Are people taking accountability? We know oftentimes survivors are quick to take accountability, right? They're also told often that the abuse is their fault and everything that goes wrong is their fault, right? And so perpetrators have ingrained that into survivors. And so survivors are quick to admit, usually, to their instances and what they've engaged in. So we still want to be aware, are both parties having that experience, right? Are both admitting, I shouldn't have done that. I need to come up with different methods. I need to go get support and help, right? Is there accountability and recognition of impact on the kids? Are the parties able to engage in safety planning is something we want to know. We want to know, are they willing to tap in resources? Are they willing to accept a DV hotline number? Are they able to call 911 in the event of an incident? Do they have access to a phone to do such things? So we want to make sure that they've engaged in safety planning and have the resources that they need. For instance, sometimes safety planning, they might need new door locks, right? That's something that we can help facilitate and get them access to. So we want to know, can they engage in safety planning? Can we partner and engage in the safety planning with them to get them the things that we need? And are they being open enough to have that conversation and dialogue with us? We want to know that. We want to know if the family is engaged in services, right? The more eyes on the family, the better, right? Usually, the more support people, the village, what does that look like? And are they engaging? And are they choosing to engage, right? Genuinely. Are they going to their appointments? Are they utilizing that time? Or is it just kind of him and a haw every week, right? We want to be mindful of that. We want to know if a protective factor for the family is civil or family law. Again, we know that these orders are not safe for everybody, We know that filing or petitioning for an order can create a safety concern. We know that retaliation can go on for a very long time. We also know that some people think it's just a piece of paper, right? And we need to know the people that think it's just a piece of paper and that they don't have to listen to it, right? Because that's very important to know for child safety. Again, school and activities, more eyes, more people, more time outside the house, autonomy, incredibly important. Opportunity for autonomy is incredibly important. And we want to know that as a protective factor. We also want to know what are the positive parenting skills for each parent, right? We all have positive skills. We want to know what they are. And can they tell us, can they relay to us what those positive parenting skills are, right? Perpetrators may not be able to tell you what the positive parenting skills of their partner are. But we want to help bring that out and highlight it for the family, that there absolutely are parenting skills and strengths in both. And we want to know that each parent is supporting the healthy parenting of the other parent, right? Are they capable of doing that? These are the primary lethality indicators. I just have it all in one slide. Please don't get visually overwhelmed. I'm going to break it down. I just wanted you guys to have it all in one place so you don't have to flip through slides. So actually, let me take one pause for a second to discuss impacts, protective factors. Does anybody have any questions about that section before I move on? Fabulous. I'm going to take that as a no. All right. When we're assessing for lethality indicators, right, we want to know the risk of something really devastating happening, right? And there are certain indicators that can tell us if the chance of that happening is increasing. So one thing we want to know for and assess within lethality indicators is what is the DV perpetrator's access to the victim, survivor, and the child? Is it restricted? Do they go over there all the time? If they aren't around, do they send somebody to come around for them? Oftentimes, perpetrators may engage in abuse by proxy, which means that they've manipulated other people within their own community to help them engage in perpetration. And it's fairly common. So we want to know if that's occurring. We also want to know, again, how do they gain access if they can't gain access? If they have supervised visitation versus unsupervised, right? We want to know what that looks like and what the capacity of that is. We also want to be mindful of perpetrators that may have extra access. So for instance, somebody who may work in law enforcement, right? They have access to multitudes of systems, right? So many systems, as well as they're very aware of the system, right? And that's a cause for concern that we want to be aware of. We also know that then they can get access, right? So much easier to get an address, so much easier, quicker to run things within some of their programming. We want to be aware if a perpetrator has access to something like that, right? We just want to be aware, right? So we can engage in that. Absolutely, you will get this PowerPoint, and you may already have it, but if you don't, we'll get it to you again. We want to know, again, about the perpetrator's pattern of abuse, right? There's highs, there's lows. We want to know all of it. We want to know what it looks like. We want to know the frequency and severity of the abuse that is occurring. We want to know how bad it is now. We want to know how bad it has been. And again, in this relationship or in other relationships, there are times that former relationships might still be a risk, and we want to be aware of that, right? For instance, survivor had a partner 15 years ago, and that partner was a perpetrator. And that partner has been engaging in harassment and stalking for the next 15 years, right? And now survivor has moved on and has a family and all of these things. That can create a risk for the children in the family. And so we want to be aware, do they have a past ex that is maintaining jealousy patterns, right? Where it can still be lethal, even though that relationship is ended, is it still present? I want to be aware of that. We want to be aware of, is there use or presence of weapons? Has weapons been a threat towards the identified survivor of the children? Does the perpetrator have special training? For instance, somebody who's skilled in like karate might have different skills with their body, right? That can increase lethality. Also, some of those people know how to poke like pressure points, right? That can do damage. I don't know how to do that, but they can do it with one finger, right? We want to know, are they trained to do such things with their body? And do they then threaten those extra skills onto their victim? We want to know again, have there been threats to kill or harm? We're highlighting the pets. Have the pets been killed or harmed? Have they threatened the victim survivor, the community members, the child, the children, themselves is very common as well, right? As a manipulation tactic, threatening self-harm is very prevalent. And we want to know, again, are these factors that are creating fear? We want to know if there's been hostage taking, stalking, jealousy. I think the state of Washington defines kidnapping as moving somebody more than 3 inches. I might be rusty on that RCW. But confining somebody, not letting them exit a room or exit a building, blocking that door, breaking their phone so they don't call 911, right? All of those can count as hostage taking. They may not be charged that way, but they might meet the legal definition of it. So we want to be aware, is that happening? Has it happened? What does it look like? Sexual violence. We want to know if there has been unwanted sexual things occurring. Now, it could be rape for sex. It could be encouragement to engage in sex work, maybe. Right? Perpetrators will manipulate that, and we want to be aware if it's happening and how it's impacting the survivor, period, but also how the survivor can show up and parent, right? We want to know, right? And again, do they need medical care? We want to know, does the perpetrator have past criminal record, right? Again, are they violent in community or just in this relationship? We want to be aware of that, right? We want to know what kind of crimes they have committed. Have they been charged for DV? We want to know what the consequences for all of those crimes were, right? Did they get jail time? Did they pay a fine, right? Did they take accountability for their behavior that got them the jail time? What does that look like? We want to know if there's a history of strangulation in their perpetration techniques. We know that strangulation, and I'm going to be rusty on this statistic, so I apologize, but it increases the chance of lethality by 750%, I think was the last indicated that I read. So exorbitantly, right? Strangulation, automatically, hugest lethality indicator that there is out there. And I'm going to be a little graphic, not too graphic. Activation trigger warning. The amount of pressure it takes to cause harm around somebody's throat is that. Squishing a water bottle, squishing a pop can. We've all scrunched up a pop can, right? It doesn't take very much pressure at all, right? So any form of that pressure, it doesn't take much to inflict lethal or serious harm, right? On accident or on purpose. We want to be aware. Again, has this been a factor in the abuse pattern, right? Has strangulation occurred so many times and restricting airflow that maybe the survivor is having some impact with their cognitive functioning, right? Have they experienced a TBI or traumatic brain injury because of patterns of strangulation and their abuse being perpetrated onto them, right? We want to know, how has strangulation been utilized? Isolating the victim, survivor, and the kids. Again, are they allowed to have friends? Where are they living? Are we out in rural country now and there's no bus access and you don't get the car? What does it look like? Okay, extreme isolation is absolutely a lethality indicator. And again, repeated violations, court orders, or protective orders, and ignoring those consequences, right? Again, perpetrators that think that's just a piece of paper and they don't have to listen to it, or they violated so many times, but they only got 15 days in jail, right? So like, what were the consequences? And again, do they care? Some perpetrators think that a trip to jail is a vacation, right? Three hots and a cot, and they get excited about it. So I think that's something to be consider of if that's a part of their identity, and how that plays into their abuse cycle. We want to know, what's the perpetrator's state of mind, right? Where are we at right now when we're looking at this and assessing? Is the DV perpetrator very obsessed with their partner? Are they very jealous? Are they engaging in electronic monitoring? What does that look like? Does, partners both have to have their location turned on, for instance? Throwing that out with electronic monitoring, right? Why might a survivor engage in electronic monitoring? For their safety. Absolutely. Sorry, I'm going to go back. To know when the abuser is coming home. Right? How much time do I have? Right? Also, it might be looking to see if their partner is cheating. Right? That's another really common one because jealousy has been input into the cycle of violence. And so there's a lot of accusing each other of engaging in infidelity. We want to know that. But primarily, yeah, the survivor wants to know when their perpetrator is coming home. And what that looks like. So absolutely. Again, we're going to look at the why behind a behavior, right? If we're doing engaging in electronic monitoring, we want to be aware. Again, we're going to be aware of negative consequence if they're ignoring the negative consequences of their violence, and the impact on the family unit. And we want to know, are they experiencing depression, desperation, or fear? Okay. We know that individuals and humans in a desperate state can revert to doing just about anything, right? We revert to some animalistic nature. And so we want to be mindful of what that looks like. And are we at that point? And what support does this person need, right? We want to know where their mind's at with that. We want to be aware of individual factors that are impacting the behavioral controls of either the identified victim survivor or the perpetrator. Okay. We want to know, are either of them engaging in substance use and how does it impact them? Right? What does the other party do when the other person is impacted? We want to know those behaviors too. We want to know, are they impacted by certain medications? For instance, somebody that takes sleeping medication might be a little groggy through part of the day, right? And so maybe not as reactive or responsive. We want to know, are there certain medications that are impacting their behaviors? Maybe it's medication associated to their mental illness that they need support with. Mental illness or psychosis is another one that occurs within DV that we want to be mindful of, right? Does this person, are they experiencing a mental health crisis? Do they need mental health support? Are they experiencing an episode of psychosis? And what does that look like? And can it happen, or do they need access to treatment, or are they going to treatment? And did it help? We want to be aware. And again, brain damage. Has somebody experienced brain damage, and how has that impacted their protective capacities, the way they engage in this relationship, and the way they engage in their role within the family? We want to be mindful of all of that for both before and after. What are we looking at pertaining to brain damage? We want to know if there's suicidality or homicidality in any of the family members, right? At a certain point, many youth and children start to identify that they want to engage in protective capacities. We want to be aware if the youth is experiencing suicidal or homicidal thoughts, right? It can happen. We want to be aware if the survivor is experiencing that, and absolutely if the perpetrator makes those allegations. So we want to be mindful of the way that's playing out, right? Because lethality can come from multiple angles in DV. We want to be aware of the adult victim's use of force. Statistically speaking, individuals that fight back, right, are more prone to be severely physically harmed in the course of an altercation. So we want to be mindful of that. And what does that look like for their altercations? And have they ever lost consciousness, and things like that we want to know about in the course of that. We also want to know if a survivor is engaging in reactive abuse, right? And are children ever in harm's way during those altercations? And we want to know the children's use of violence. Again, have they been coerced to engaging in violence? Are they seeing a pattern, seeing a behavior, and identifying that as their own persona and who they need to become, right? We want to know, are the children utilizing violence, and how and why? There are additional situational factors that absolutely increase the chance of a big incident or lethality occurring. One of those is separation. Okay, if they're separating, the victim has decided to flee for sure this time, right? The perpetrator losing access and control can create a lethality risk. We also know that survivors go back about 7 times before leaving, right? And so we want to be very mindful of that, and especially if it's the last and final time that they're really, really done, because it can create severe lethality. We once thought that the lethal window prior to separation was about 90 days, 30 to 90 days, give or take. And about 90 days after leaving is what people initially speculated. Now we know that the lethal window is a year prior for folks, about a year prior to leaving, and up to 2 years after separating, right? As the perpetrator continues to lose control, and it's getting reinforced, the lethality is still present for at least 2 years. Now we're all here because they got kids together, right? That means they have to have some kind of contact at least till the kids are 18, right? So that's still continued access, right, for the perpetrator, right? I want to be mindful of that continued access if kids are under 18. We want to be aware of other major stressors or recent instability. Did somebody lose a job? Did somebody lose a family member or somebody they care about? Has there been any major impacts? House fire, right? Has there been any other major stressors that are just creating something right now for the family? Pregnancy, wanted or unwanted, pregnancy becomes a very lethal situation within domestic violence. Especially if there's been a pattern of reproductive control. And what I mean by that is, has one partner messed with the birth control method of the other? Or has one partner not allowed the time space after having a baby before engaging in additional sexual activities? Right? Was there sexual abuse occurring? Has one partner been forced to have children back to back to back, 7 kids in a row with 3 months in between, right? Did they choose to do that? Did they want to do that, right? We want to be mindful of all of that. And again, health impacts of that. If it is a first child, together, that might also be something that we want to be aware of, because once the baby is born, attention shifts, right, from the identified perpetrator to the child, and that can create increased behaviors, right? So we want to know if that's occurring, and how they responded to past pregnancies, and things like that. We want to know how pregnancy has been impacted within their dynamic. Again, we want to know about engagement with the court system. And is it a protective capacity or is it a risk? We want to be aware. Is it supporting them or is it not? And if there are stepchildren or blended families, lethality already goes up within domestic violence, oftentimes associated to jealousy and anxiety. But we want to be mindful that blended families are at more risk. And the final lethality risk that really reinforces all of the others is past failures of systems to respond appropriately. And I mean all of them, right? Let's say, for instance, a perpetrator goes to mental health counseling, and in mental health counseling, they get validated that they are the survivor. They are the one being perpetrated against, right? And now they have all of this vocabulary, right? And new awareness and new skills and new resources. And they were reinforced that the accountability wasn't theirs to carry, right? We want to be mindful if they had that. If there were criminal charges, if there were repeated violations, did they get jail time? Did they get fined? What was it? What was their jail time? Oftentimes with DV, it might be an overnight, right? We want to know, what did that look like? Was law enforcement responding? Were they documenting these violations, right? How has the systems responded to help intervene in the violence? If law enforcement did respond, did they placate the perpetrator or did they hold them accountable, right? There's oftentimes in some communities, they'll be like, oh, this is their normal behavior, right? This is their normal behavior. We spend here all the time, but they aren't arresting anybody, right? We want to know if that has occurred within the family. So I'm so sorry. I was reading Angie's question. Okay. Angie would like to know about physical abuse and DV occurring within a household where the perpetrator is not a partner, but maybe a family member living in the home. That's something that we would absolutely want to be aware of, right? We want to assess the impact. We want to we would offer resources associated to that. We may potentially call law enforcement, right? Because that would be a time that if a child was put at risk, maybe we do our mandated report to law enforcement if the person was not acting as a parental figure. So there may be times that we intervene in those. Um, Physical abuse can vary. Some of those statistics, I'll be honest, I don't have those. That is a different form of domestic violence that is very different, and it needs to be intervened differently than intimate partner violence. But we would address it and we would give resources. And Angie, was that helpful? No problem. Okay. We just talked about a lot of lethality indicators, so I invite you all to take a breath with me. So that's never the fun one. Any questions about lethality indicators and what DCYF is looking for pertaining to lethality in family? Okay. We utilize a redaction statement on our notes pertaining to DV for further protection. So our DV specialized assessment, as well as notes where we receive disclosures from the identified survivor and the children. We do put a redaction statement at the beginning. If there is a risk to the child or the survivor from their disclosure to us that we have found from the pattern of perpetration, we're going to highlight it in each and every case note where we're discussing DV in the family, and especially the DV specialized assessment. We would be highlighting what is the risk of the perpetrator having access to this information, so in the future we could be mindful for reduction. We engage in various forms of DV, or we engage in different forms of safety planning, right? Our main goal is child maltreatment. That is our main safety planning framework and what we're utilizing on. And through the course of that, we might engage at times with levels of DV safety planning, right? And in collaboration with our system partners, we might come together with DV advocates to help enhance that DV safety planning. We might call the hotline ourselves as a helping professional and community in order to get guidance of how to support an individual experiencing this kind of violence, right? That can be a form of DV safety planning and prevention work. We might be helping identify that they need a phone, right? Maybe they need resource to very concrete goods, a phone, door locks, etc. Right? We're going to help give them access to those things if that's what they need, or shelter, things like that. We're going to help try to get them access to that if that's an identified need within the family. Big considerations that we take into account for safety planning. Again, we want to be mindful of the lethality. We want to be mindful in addressing all of the lethality indicators that are present in some form or way. And we want to be mindful that perpetrators can increase their behavior as they are losing control, right? And reinforcement and accountability can increase behaviors. So we want to be very aware of that, especially as we start to enforce accountability. We want to be mindful that separation alone does not create safety for these families. In fact, it might increase the safety concerns. Because, for instance, a perpetrator that does injure the children or does utilize them as a form of manipulation and control within the relationship, right? If they separate, parental rights are parental rights, right? Perpetrators often, more often than not, have unsupervised access to the children and may still be perpetrating against the children. And we want to be aware of that. And now the survivor isn't in the home to intervene, right? And be a protective capacity. So we want to be mindful of what separation and visitation time looks like and planning accordingly, because sometimes we might need different resources to implement. And in collaboration with our community partners, both advocates, you all, everybody, we all got to come together for DV. DV is hard. We all have certain pieces of the puzzle, and we're going to come together to try and help this family out, and try to not have too many gaps and holes in between. So very important. We want to collaborate with you all every chance we can get. And we're going to continue working on increasing those protective factors, both as DCYF resources, but in collaboration with everyone. We want to make sure that we're implementing more of those. Under DCYF safety framework, domestic violence is the main safety for domestic violence. Safety threat number 4 is identified as what we're assessing when we're looking at safety criteria, safety threshold, when domestic violence is the main concern or a concern in the family. So we want to be aware of how that incident impacted the child's safety specifically and behaviorally. So we want to be aware, again, has the perpetrator caused significant harm or made threats of significant harm against both the adult victim survivor or the children? Have there been threats if they, engaged in disclosures, right? Because now it's all out there. Have there been threats? What does that look like? We want to know, has the perpetrator threatened to seriously harm the child or engaged in seriously harming the child? We want to know if the violence is increasing to the point that there could be serious harm or serious harm is likely to occur for the survivor or the children. We want to be aware of that. And we want to be aware if indications of increased dangers from the DV perpetrator, such as suicide attempts or substance use or threats of weapons, have they increased? Have more threats come out? Have they gotten scarier or more lethal over a certain period of time? What is that looking like? Is it occurring? And then we want to be mindful of, can the survivor get support, right? And is that support responsive? Again, do we have protective factors in the community or do we not? And that's what we want to look at when we're looking at child safety specifically underneath our safety framework. Case consultations are incredibly important to us. We highly, highly value them. Our caseworkers now also have opportunity. Some regions, they have multidisciplinary teams that they can go for domestic violence consultation. Now they have a domestic violence program manager and regional leads that they can come in. And then we absolutely still include DV advocates as well as domestic violence intervention treatment providers. And we want to include everybody. We want to know everybody and talk about everybody and get all the information we can get. So consultations are key, shared decision making, and we are increasing in our chances of consultation. So it's available and occurring, and we're working very actively on that. Our workers have access to all kinds of new resources, and I'd be happy to share any or all of these to you that they found beneficial. I created a new resource to where they don't have to go hunt for resources anymore. It's all on one internet page internally, where they can find all kinds of one-pagers that are protective capacities, how to engage, how to screen for strangulation, how to provide support to family members where they're trying to support a survivor and the kids and the perpetrator. There's handouts of how to support them, what's helpful. They have all the DV hotlines available here, cultural DV hotlines, the youth resource for youth that are experiencing intimate partner violence is all easily available, and I'd be happy to share all of those. And then we also have a gathering of on-demand training opportunities because I get excited about trainings, and there's all kinds of community experts out there with really good stuff for free. And if anybody needs CEUs, there's some really good opportunities. These are all of the regional leads. So if you are across the state and need to reach out to somebody about DV, these are all of our fantastic regional leads. Of course, you're more than welcome to reach out to me at any point in time. Please feel free. But again, if you ever need something that's very regionally specific, my leads are fantastical in supporting. All right, folks. Any final questions, thoughts, or comments? Yes, I'll compile a follow-up email with some resources that you all expressed some interest in. I will absolutely compile that. Okay. All right, folks, you have my email. If you ever have a question, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for your time today and all of you showing up. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Lindsey.
Is Alice still here?
Alice.
Yes, right here.
Oh,
It's Alice.
okay.
Alice,
Oh,
thank
I'm
you.
so sorry.
Oh, no,
I
no,
didn't-
it's just spelled exactly like Alice, so no worry.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. Thank you for correcting me. I appreciate it. Beautiful name. Okay. If you suspect devious advocates, is contacting the regular so sufficient? What do you mean?
Well, so I understand that your position in particular is a new position and that it's a specific for DV, and our social worker for our cases are quote unquote general social workers, so they deal with everything and anything. So if we suspect like a DV situation, in addition to telling our social worker, which hopefully has already suspected it also, should we reach out beyond that social worker and reach out to your department, basically?
You're absolutely welcome to reach out anytime. If you're seeing something that you're concerned about in community and practice, I want to know about it. Support might be needed. Additionally, it could be a good time for a consult. And not all workers know. We're trying to get the word out there that consults are available, right? But big state, a lot of people. They may not know that they have an internal person now to provide consultation. So that could be a time of, hey, can we call a consult together to all get on the same page? And can we please include Lindsey? That would be perfectly appropriate.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I was wondering. And this is, I don't
Absolutely.
know what the different zones are. So what zone would Pierce County be? Do you know?
Pierce, Pierce County will be Region 5, and my domestic violence lead for that region is Lauren Malden.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay, glad we got that question. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Ryan. I'll get you an email here shortly with some of
Sounds
those
great.
resources.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.